Three women have been charged in connection with the brutal murder of 42-year-old Kevin Walker, a Digicel employee whose body was discovered in a barrel last month. Police say Walker was lured to a location in the corporate area on February 1st, where he was ambushed by four men, robbed and later beaten and stabbed. His body was then stuffed into a barrel and dumped in a gully. An investigation led to the arrest of Anita Vanzi, Sade Bennett, and Joanna Williams, who now face multiple charges, including murder, conspiracy to murder, and involvement in a criminal organization. Authorities say Vanzi was found with Walker's credit card during a raid on February 5th, while the other two suspects were later apprehended. Investigations ongoing. Internationally, a fuel tanker and a cargo vessel collided in the North Sea off the British coast on the morning of March 10th, sparking a massive fire. The tanker MV Stena Immaculate was struck by the Portugal-registered Solong container ship near Hull, causing explosions and a fuel spill. All crew members aboard the Stena Immaculate evacuated safely, with 32 people brought ashore for medical attention. Emergency teams, including the UK Coast Guard and lifeboat crews, are working to contain the situation. British officials say they are closely monitoring developments as rescue and firefighting efforts continue. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
Promises, claims. Elections will bring about a lot of talk, and the question is who will actually deliver on all of it. Granted, some leeway does have to be given. Case in point, take the then PDP, now TPP. They made certain promises, but to some extent, they tried to be realistic with their promises. Maybe you could argue that they weren't completely realistic with their promises. But when they actually got into office and saw the reality, they immediately communicated, maybe to some extent, again, you could argue if it was good enough or not, but at least they attempted to, that things weren't going to play out exactly how they promised it would. That's just the reality of an election. Particularly since we live in a society where transparency apparently is a four-letter word. Dare we speak it in the halls of power? Oh, no, 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 no. That's not for polite company. Because the execution is left wanting. Granted, yes, you know, when it comes time to talking to the public, you'll hear the word thrown out there as well as other ideals. But fact of the matter is, if you're a new administration, you're not necessarily guaranteed to know exactly what's going on. So how could you keep promises if you don't know you're in a position to keep them or not? But to some extent, you still have to try to analyze the situation, I would hope, and say, this is what I'm going to do to improve things, so please vote for me. Now, in the case of Stuart Young, he's like a hybrid. He's an incumbent, yet not, because Dr. Rowley is retiring. In our young nation, we don't have a lot of examples of how the different scenarios will play out. They will play out. There will be always a lot of firsts that just have to happen. It's not like if it's some monumental moment in time. It's just literally, it's the first time this has happened. So like I have said before, it seems as though Stuart Young is promising a lot of different things. a lot of different things that a lot of people, or at least, let me not speak for the rest of you, I complain about. And now, I'm not saying that he listens to me, but he's probably hearing it from various quarters, right? One of the latest ones is the call for better maintenance. We've said it all on the show. Government don't also maintain nothing. Just look at the PTSC, look at police vehicles, what about the Coast Guard ships, to some extent our roadways, our utility infrastructure, at least with regards potentially with WASA and our water distribution network. At the end, they do put in the effort to maintain pumping stations, booster stations, and the like, right? Okay. Minister Young, he's doing this at the opening of, I believe, the central block of Port-of-Spain General. And the sentiment, technically, we can't knock him for saying things that we do want to hear. The trick is, we don't just want to hear it. Like transparency, we don't want to hear talk about transparency and accountability. We want to see actions about transparency and accountability. And similarly, maintaining our assets, we want to see it. We want to see it be done. One of the things that's holding the country back is our road network and our lack of mass transit public transportation. Because, I don't know if you know this, but we kind of reached the point where there's only so many more roads we could add, more lanes, to certain pre-existing routes. There are going to be bottlenecks in and out of Port-of-Spain. And the alternative is you could decentralize a lot of government services from Port-of-Spain. That would help. But at the end of the day, adding more lanes to our highway is just going to encourage more cars to drive at certain times. It will not necessarily alleviate the traffic unless we were some wide open, plain, desert, what have you, with just so much excess space and sparse urbanization, sparse development, that they just have all this excess space they could just pave over constantly. And Lord only knows how expensive that would be if we try to implement that type of solution in the long term every time it seems as though the road networks gets choked up. Now, rail, bus, I mean, maintenance of the ferries, that's a whole other kettle of fish, right? But the fact that we just seemingly can't maintain the bus service because we can't maintain the buses. Think about it. Think about how hard is it supposed to be to maintain a bus. Yes, I understand. It's not like you're maintaining a tricycle. But at some point, you invest in these rather large, expensive vehicles. One would hope you would also figure out a way to practically ensure that they are well maintained, whether you determine best to have a private contractor do it and then don't allow corruption to touch the contract. That's a whole other kettle of fish. I understand that. Or you determine how best to have maintenance crews employed by the PTSC that are held accountable. Hey, we're back there again. So, Stuart Young, I can't, he talks about education. I can't remember what the other thing he spoke about. There's one more that if we have time we'll get to today. Can't remember if it was diversification or not. The point is, these are the things that are non-oil and gas, non-building a new school, right? These are the kind of things that governments tend to avoid. Oh my God, fixing the education syllabus? I don't know how to do that. Let's just build more schools and say we educate the people. Let's make education free again. Now, to some extent, you know, after GATE, you can't make bachelor degrees more free, so what are you going to do about education? Like, to some extent, they're slowly running out of the freeness. How much more freeness you could give, especially when you're running out of the money. So I understand that you have to pivot on issues in order to offer something to the people. The problem is, these sorts of things are almost never delivered. And it's not only the politicians' faults. There's a lot of institutional hesitation, inertia, But to quote a very silly cartoon movie, you voted to lead, not just to read. Meanwhile, while Minister Young is making campaign promises, all the while being part of the incumbent party that basically, technically failed to deliver on those items, hence why he's making these things an issue, right? If the current administration succeeded, he couldn't make those promises. That's the interesting paradox of everything he says he's going to try to accomplish. Now, one could argue, with better communication, you would be able to tap dance through that issue reasonably. But no one ever accused politicians of being good communicators. The opposition leader, however, I guess they are going to continue with their strategy of fight everything down no matter how effective it may or may not be. So the opposition leader is saying that the Prime Minister is attempting to anoint a successor outside of the supreme law and the Constitution, which I think ultimately that is not the best way to put it. You see, we put it as though it would be more effective if the PNM were able to have an internal election in order to choose the political leader who will then take up the mantle of Dr. Rowley, who will then be the Prime Minister until the next election. That's what's happened in the UK and I believe in Canada. Well, at least in the UK. We know that the Conservative Party, they went through like 3 people until, I can't remember if Labour won the last election or not. Forgive me. But they did it internally because at the end of the day, their party won the previous election. Their party had the majority of MPs in the House and thus formed the government. Now, as was pointed out, I can't remember if it was a caller, I think it was, when it was time for Patrick Manning to be in the 3-man opposition to the NAR, the 3 of them decided Patrick Manning would be the opposition leader. And then that translated to him having the inside track to being political leader. There was no, oh my God. Now, granted, yes, one could say, well, you're not going to say the government collapse, call a general election because of the opposition leader selection. But the point is, there's nothing in law that says that for Dr. Rowley to step down, the government has to dissolve. And there is recent precedent in the source of our political system that basically shows a precedent that is not the case. When Boris Johnson stepped down, they didn't call a general election. They picked a new political leader. I can't remember the mechanism, but they picked a new leader for their party. She didn't last very long, but she was selected to be the new Prime Minister. And then when she failed, her replacement was similarly selected. They didn't have a general election. And this is a bit of an overreach in my opinion. And depending on your point of view, it doesn't make you look good. So I don't know why you're going there. It is well within the right, whether you want to argue if it is ethically right, morally right to do so or not, it is well within the right of Parliament to say, we have the majority of PNM, so we will select the next Prime Minister within the House. Now, if PNM people cross the floor, then that'll, change the whole dynamics of the situation. But they have the majority. Whoever commands the majority of the House will be selected as Prime Minister. That's essentially it. Unless something goes on wrong, there is technically nothing illegal with what is going on with appointing Stuart Young as the interim, I add that on, and others and any media. But essentially that's what he will be, the interim Prime Minister until the upcoming general elections. And then, technically speaking, if you want to say, oh, he should be elected as political leader to contest the general, that's an internal party matter ultimately at the end of the day. However they decide to do it. If the party of the PNM can tolerate him being anointed and not elected as political leader for the general election, that's up to them. I don't necessarily like it, but I'm not necessarily in a place to do anything about it. So this is Prasad Bisasa. Sometimes I wonder, because you are making the situation more extreme. And I will just throw this warning out there. With regards to our racially charged politics and the extreme language we're using, look at what's going on in the States. They use extreme language. The end of the nation, the destruction. It works both ways. Both parties essentially, or both sides essentially do it, right? And what are we left with? We are left with a political environment where people are literally thinking it's a war. You think January 6th was bad? To some extent, Democratic supporters were looking to do something very similar. But I think probably cooler heads prevailed and said, hey, we can't go and blame all of those Republicans and then go and do the same thing and somehow try to pretend that it's different just because we don't like their candidates. And then now the next question is, when will political violence get worse? And that's something I don't want to see in this country. I'm not going to speak about that in any great detail, but it's just the more extreme your language and the more you potentially overblow situations. But you need to be seen as though you're doing something, right? Well, again, similar to what I said with regards to some of the failures of communication with the government, no one ever blamed politicians for being good communicators, right? You could speak about these issues in a way that makes practical sense, that's more effective, that is not an absolutist stance, that leaves you no room to maneuver, and therefore, depending on how things turn out, makes you look rather foolish, especially dependent on the perceptions of everybody involved. Yes, your base will always support you no matter what. But if that was good enough, you would be in government already. And it is not. Case in point, 4 more people resigned from the UNC, and all the opposition leader could have said was, it's childish and irrelevant. Okay. At some point, with regards to politicians on the whole, we have to be willing to say that they're wearing no clothes. And with that said, let's transition now to today's Daily Review. All right, one of the main things that I want to get to today before we welcome our guests, one of the things that I do not appreciate from the Prime Minister, there are things that I do appreciate from him. And I will say that given the crop of politicians in our political landscape, if you want to say you're grading on a curve, fine, but there are not a lot of better alternatives to Prime Minister than him. Now, if you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, I leave that up to you. But there have been various situations where he has provided stability. One of the things that we have criticized the administration for, because we do not like how they are going about doing it, is with regard to the economy and seemingly the over-prioritization of certain projects in the energy sector. One of the key ones being the Dragon gas deal. Because many people saw the writing on the wall. Nicolas Maduro is not someone who is offering stability, at least with regards to international relations. The current regime, which to some extent could trace back to Chavez, they are basically known for undermining international business interests in their own country, privatizing certain corporations, and essentially, I mean, depending on how you view things, stealing from private interests, right? Of course, you will say, oh, well, it's theirs. Well, I will hope you remember that if there ever is a time when our government, under whoever, decides to do something similar, and then you want to complain because you're the victim in the situation. Right. I'm not here to say which international corporation had fair trading practices in Venezuela or not. The point is, we looked at the dragon gas situation and it didn't seem to be on stable ground, and the government kept trying to say that everything was fine. They didn't say that it was a guaranteed deal, but they tried to basically push back against any concerns. And one of the things that they've done consistently is frame it in a way of, why do you want to see it fail? Which I don't understand. You see, I don't know. Does the government really think this is what people believe to be the case? Now, I can understand if you look at the opposition, given the MO of how our politics are, the opposition party, that's what they do. Well, and when I say they, I don't mean just the UNC. I also, to some extent, mean the PNM when they're in opposition, right? That's what opposition, whoever is there, does in our current political environment. You oppose for opposing's sake. The UNC holds that slot right now, and they are holding true to that 99.9% of the time. But to some extent, I haven't necessarily seen the opposition actually say or do anything to imply, no, this deal must be sunk. This meal must be stopped. Now, the opposition leader did say that she was going to honor any refinery deal. I don't necessarily agree with that. But with regards to Dragon, in fact, I wouldn't even say the criticisms of the Dragon deal. The opposition was the leading body or voice on that situation. It was a lot of stakeholders, maybe some former partnership UNC ministers or COP ministers like Kevin Ramnarayan, right? But he did so under the capacity of his professional expertise. He's working in the energy sector, and others, which potentially included people who were there during the PNM as well. But a lot of economists, people in the energy sector, except political analysts, all looked at the situation and said, how could you trust America? Because the Biden administration and all was basically saying, sorry, not how could you trust America. How could you assume America will just give us what we want? When Nicolas Maduro was essentially not living up to his end of the bargain to get the sanctions lifted. Sanctions are, you could say, oh, Trump did it, he do like the head. But Biden didn't necessarily lift them wholesale. He put a lot of conditions and what have you. So when the Prime Minister comes in and says, why do you all want to see it fail? Stop wishing failure on Dragon Gas. No one is wishing failure on Dragon Gas. When the Dragon Gas deal was announced, 2 out of 3 people on this desk that morning was actually very positive about it. And those 2 people were me and Karen Nessishera. And we have been highly critical of the overall situation since then, because we had to stick a fork in our optimism and get hit with reality. Maduro is an unreliable partner, and regardless of which party came into power, I mean, Kamala Harris, I don't know, from my perspective, she may have done crazier things. The Americans probably would not have moved ahead long term with any sort of gas arrangement, unless things really hit the fan in other parts of the world and you know, the energy supply became a crisis again. And it would probably need to be even worse than what we saw when the Ukraine war started in order to give Maduro more leeway, more concessions, more compromises for his position. So I don't understand. In fact, and this is where I have to agree with the opposition leader. She is asking the Prime Minister to name those encouraging US sanctions. That's the headline. I want to just get to the article. So she's also speaking about the US visa situation. But I think, to some extent, name those who want to see the situation fail. At least I'm partially interpreting it that way. Because she is saying, well, the US government is coming for us because we seem to be kissing too close to Venezuela, despite the fact that we technically join with CARICOM whenever Venezuela says anything threatening to Guyana. We don't want to see it fail. It's just, it seems as though we put too much eggs in the Dragon gas basket. Whether they want to admit it or not, that seems to be the case. Even Shell is not looking to say, you know, yeah, everything is fine here, we're moving ahead 100%. And now that it's seemingly going to be tanked, we're not wishing it to be tanked. We're just pointing out the obvious, the most reasonable conclusion based on how things are going so far. It's not reasonable for third-party analysts and speakers to say, everything is fine, we're going to get the Dragon deal. It's not. So I would advise the government to stop trying to frame it this way. You see, like I said, like I started to say, I don't know if it's because that's usually the MO of oppositions and seemingly around the world now, that the government is making that assumption, or if they very well know this is not the truth, but they need to frame some sort of counter talking point to defend themselves with, and this is the best they could come up with. By framing it, by changing the nature of the conversation, they don't actually have to defend the decision of putting so much hope in Dragon, and now that it's falling through, what are we going to do? Because let's not forget, at least it took a court for the Minister of Finance to admit. I don't think they actually admitted this in any other area before, and now that it's out in public, it's easier for them to say, right? But even then, they're not going to say too much. They don't want it to keep circulating. But let's not forget, Coleman Bid admitted to a court in the next 3 years. He said 3 years in court. He said 2 years after the fact in public speaking. But he said the next 3 years are going to be rough. And without Dragon, I mean, at the very best, what this means is Dragon gas will be delayed in its implementation. So that 3-year number probably grew bigger. And that's what we're talking about, mismanaging the overall situation. We're not being placed in a position to succeed. And if that's the case, potentially we're being, by default, stuck in a position to fail, potentially. We have to wait and see how things turns out. So maybe you should try a different tactic. It's ironic, right? People don't like to hear when you say the two parties are different sides of the same coin. But look, I have basically had 2 situations where I need to tell the opposition leader and the current political leader, head of government, maybe try a different tactic when you're talking now. It might be more effective. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll welcome our guests. We'll continue on the energy sector. Getting to that topic, maybe we'll clear things up. Someone who knows a bit more than me with regards to the refinery. Stay tuned. This is Talking About a WSN show. Michael Small. We'll be right back after this.
I am Dr. Delphina Ovid, your friendly neighborhood dentist. At Community Hospital Dental Clinic, we offer examinations which include x-rays, basic oral cancer screening, and a treatment plan. We also offer cleanings, fillings, extractions, root canal treatment, and complete and partial dentures. Remember, you don't have to brush and floss all your teeth, just the ones you want to keep.
Give us a call at 235-5479.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
Where good private health care is affordable.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas, and Movie Town, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
I'm back here and talking about WSN show, Michael Small, joined by my guest. He is the political leader of the Movement of Social Justice. This is, of course, Mr. David Abdullah. Mr. Abdullah, good morning. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me, Sean, and good morning to all who are tuned in.
Well, I have to admit, one of my viewers actually encouraged me to speak to you on this topic that we're going to talk about. But I actually did give that lead to AM Prime, so that's why it took a little longer. But the topic on the refinery is an interesting one. My position before joining media, I was willing to believe the government line. It seemed relatively reasonable, just given on the outside looking in on the situation that I read in the news, right? Because I saw resistance in the union to, at times, to work with the government. So I could understand, at least to some extent, where the government was coming from. Except, now we're looking to try to get the refinery back up and running, right? Whether we sell it, we lease it, what have you, which implies that, well, there was nothing wrong directly with the refinery. So why was it shut down? We could complain about how government, state entities and stuff was being run, but it seems as though the refinery itself, potentially, if it could run now without generating a loss, couldn't it be run back then without generating a loss? Was the loss just methods of accounting, and to some extent we gave up an asset that was going to earn us foreign exchange because it's a big line item in the budget. It's a special entry in Minister Imbe's presentation. What was your opinion on the refinery's operations then?
Okay, so, I was a member of the committee, popularly known as the Lashley Committee, which was the committee appointed by the cabinet to look at the operations of Petrotrin. This committee was appointed sometime in early 2017, and we submitted our report at the beginning of June 2017. So that's a year and more before the decision was taken to close the refinery. And that committee, we looked at the operations, and we did not recommend the closure of the refinery. What we recommended was a restructuring of Petrotrin, and that restructuring would have seen of different governance arrangements, because the committee was of the view that the most critical problem affecting Petrotrin, like, and you mentioned other state enterprises, is governance. Is not so much the fact of whether or not it was profitable or not, and I'll come to that in a moment. But when you have a change in government every 5 years or whatever, sometimes a change in minister, even more frequently than that, you get a change in members of the board, and then the new board coming in, not aware of what was happening before, believes that everything the previous board and previous government did was nonsense, so they want to throw that out the window and start afresh. You can't run a company like Petrotrin in particular. We could run a parlor like that perhaps, but not a company like Petrotrin, which is a oil company that is operating not just locally, but globally. And therefore you need long-term strategic planning and consistent implementation of plans and policies and so on. So we recommended a different way of, as a Lashley committee, of constituting the board, so that the board would have continuity beyond 5 years, and that board members should be appointed not just by cabinet choosing who they want, but by cabinet engaging with, or the line minister engaging with stakeholders to get really representatives of stakeholders. So you get people who are knowledgeable, professional, and appointed on the basis of that rather than on party affiliation. The other recommendation was to have the different operating units, refinery and marketing on the one hand, and exploration and production on the other hand, operating as not separate, but well, separate in the extent that the senior person, vice president, whatever, would have full responsibility for everything that happened in that unit, rather than having a management system where all decisions went to the executive management team, so that the vice president, E&P, exploration and production, was not necessarily held to account for whatever happened within his or her business unit. So those are the basic recommendations that the Lashley committee made. So that's the first thing. Now, the second thing is, and I have some figures here. One of these days I'll put it in a PowerPoint slide and put it up on the screen for you. So I'm going to look at a report, which was an internal report. You could see it's Refining and Marketing Division, April 2018. So this was shortly before the company, the refinery was closed and the company, all the workers were sent home. So in this report, which was the year-to-date, actual April, the revenue would have been year-to-date. Let's take the year-to-date. So that would have been the first 4 months of the year, January, February, March, April 2018. The total revenue was TT dollars, 12,700,000,000. Yes, and the gross margin, the total feedstock cost, that is the cost of all the crude and so on, was 11.9 million. So, you know, the Prime Minister had said, and Minister of Energy keep repeating that they had to import crude, and therefore it was losing money. But our refineries in Trinidad, and the first refinery built by Shell, known as United British Oil Fields of Trinidad in Point Fortin around 1908, and then the Point of Perry refinery built by a British company called Leaseholds, was Trinidad Leaseholds Limited, shortly after that. Our refineries always were predicated and constructed and operated on the basis of imported crude. We never had enough crude in this country to run our refineries. At the peak of crude production was in the 70s, when Amoco was producing a significant amount of crude that was later bought over by BP, but Amoco, significant amount of crude off the East Coast. Not a drop of that crude off the East Coast produced by Amoco was ever refined either at Point of Perry or in the Point Fortin refineries. And we were producing at maximum about 250,000 barrels of crude oil a day. And the Point of Perry refinery alone at its peak, run by Texaco, had a throughput of 360,000 barrels of crude. So it was always a basis of importing crude, refining it, and selling the product. So what is known as the gross margin, that is the difference between your crude costs and this revenue from your sales, was $1.5 billion for the first 4 months of 2018. Now, you then had to take out your other costs, like your labor costs and so on. And at the end of that, you still had an operating surplus of $600,000, right? So your direct fixed expenses was $624,000. Your direct variable expenses was $292,000. Now, the refinery, because Petrotrin was an integrated oil company from exploration to refining and then the sale of products, the revenue was coming from the sale of refined products. And therefore, your corporate overheads, which is your executive management team, your public relations, all of that, that would have been added to the refinery expenses in that sense. But it really was for the overall company. That was $192,000. So you still would have had a profit. But then you had depreciation, which is a non-cost item, but you have to put it aside in accounting terms, of about $500,000. And then the company would have shown a loss. But it wasn't an operating loss. The refinery was never operating at a loss. It was all of these additional costs. And then you had the crucial one, which was interest and finance charges on the debt that Petrotrin had of another $500,000. $500 million, not $500 million. And therefore, the net income was in deficit at $650 million. But the refinery itself was profitable. Now, the union had agreed with the company in April of 2018 to enter into a restructuring exercise, which the union would have known would have resulted in, I had retired from the union before that, but 2 years prior to that, but the union would have known it would have led to a reduction in the human resource numbers, because there was a significant number of people, about 50% of the workforce was over the age of 50. So quite a few people would have accepted an early retirement program. So your labor costs could have come down and therefore improved the viability of the company. Now, and I will give you it's not audited. This was the management accounts, Petrotrin management accounts of 2018 August, which basically would have been the last period of its operations, yes? And so I'm going to read from the statement, refining and marketing operations and so on. Total sales came up to $21.6 billion. We're talking about TT dollars. Of that, local sales, which have been Petrotrin sales to NP and Unipet and so on, 4.8 million. Regional sales, because they sold, and I could tell you the kind of balance of local regional in a moment, 5.4 billion. Extra regional, so this would have been outside of CARICOM, but within maybe the Caribbean region, 4.3 billion, and then international 7 billion TT dollars. Total would have been $21.6 billion.
Question: that revenue would have been realized in US dollars, though, correct?
No.
No.
So this is accounted for in TT dollars, but some of it would have been realized in US dollars.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
The international sales and the regional, extra regional sales, those would have to be paid in US dollars. The TT, the local sales, local revenue would have all been TT dollars, because NP and Unipet would only pay Petrotrin in TT dollars, right? Now, you then come to the cost of crude, including, so you have foreign crude, 13.4 billion, and then you had the own crude. This is, they have to account now from the crude that the refinery would have gotten from its own production, which would have been Petrotrin's own production, 4.2 billion. Farm out and lease out purchases, 1.1 billion, and some other small operators, 415 million. So the total purchases of crude going into the refinery was 19.6 billion. Now this is cumulative for the financial year up to the end of August, bearing in mind that the company's financial year ran from October to September. So we're talking about 11 months, yes? So on the basis of revenue of 21.6 billion and cost of crude, 19.6 billion, it therefore meant that the gross margin, and on how a refinery you calculate its profitability, is gross margin, which is the difference between the cost of crude coming in and the value of your products that you sold, your revenue. That is your gross margin. You then take out of that amount of your gross margin the other costs for refining, which is your labor costs, your electricity costs, other utilities and so on, other maintenance costs and that kind of thing. And when you take out those costs, you then get your net margin. And if your net margin is positive, it means that the refinery is operating at a profit. So the gross margin was $2.6 billion for the 11 months. And then the operating expenses, which would have been like your labor and things like that, was $1.5 billion. So, and they had other expenses, depreciation, your the cost of your corporate expenses and so on. That came up to a total of 2.4 billion, all your other costs associated with the company. And therefore, at the end of the day, for the 11 months, it was still having an operating surplus of $270 million. So the refinery was still profitable. What then happened is that the interest on the loans, that then came up to over $700 million, yes? And that is what caused the company to be in a loss-making position. So let me make two other points though. One, Petrotrin never defaulted on any of its loans. It paid all of its loans on time and in US dollars, so that some of the US dollars it earned, it then allocated that to the payment of loans because those loans were borrowed in US dollars. And the second point I want to make is at no point in time prior to the decision to close Petrotrin did the government put a cent, not a single cent, went into Petrotrin. You know, like other companies, Cal and so on, you would have a subvention where money comes directly from taxpayers to go into the state company to keep that state company operating, right? It's accounted for under transfers and subsidies in the national budget. Not a single cent came out of transfers and subsidies, out of taxpayers' money to go into Petrotrin. Now, what did happen is that for about 2 or 3 years prior to the closure, Petrotrin, given the fact that, as I just described, when you added in the loan payments which it was making, it honored those loans, but it was not able for a couple of years to pay the taxes. So taxpayers did not get what Petrotrin ought to pay in taxes. Yes? Right. However, there was also an amount which was owed by the government to Petrotrin because, you know, when you go and buy fuel at the pump, you buy it at the subsidized price. Well, premium is no longer subsidized, but diesel and super subsidized price. The difference between the subsidized price and the market price is what the government is supposed to give to NP, and NP is supposed to pay to Petrotrin, because Petrotrin is supposed to receive the full market value of gasoline and diesel and so on. But because of the subsidy arrangements, there were delays in those payments. So because Petrotrin wasn't paying taxes, the government wasn't giving the subsidy to Petrotrin. So there was a net effect. The net effect was that Petrotrin still owed a certain amount of tax, but it wasn't as big as what the government was making out to be. Now, it's very significant that in February of 2018, you know, and we made all of these points, you know, in 2018, when the announcement was made, I was on several television programs. In fact, the same night the announcement was made, I was on one TV station, next morning on 2 radio interviews. There were a number of public panel discussions. MSJ self-organized one down at Cara Suites. We presented all the documentation. I helped to contribute to the OWQ's document, which is this document here. Get the right direction.
Next direction, next way.
Next way, sorry. Yeah. Saving Petrotrin, OWQ's alternative plan, and a lot of detail was put into this document. The media did not carry the kind of reporting of our position compared to the government's position. They were taking the government's position as gospel, which was unfortunate. But in 2018, February, which is months before any decision was taken to close, there was a Joint Select Committee of Parliament on Energy, Standing Joint Select Committee on Energy of the Parliament. And the board of Petrotrin, including the chairman, Wilfred Aspinay, and one of the directors, Mr. Nigel Edwards, who is now the executive director of the Unit Trust Corporation. Nigel Edwards, being an accounting person, gave a lot of data to the JSC. And what he said is that there was no issue of closing the refinery, you know. That discussion never came up. He said that Petrotrin had very significant free cash flows. Free cash flows is what you earn before you calculate interest payments and taxes and so on, right? And depreciation. And that amounted to 1.8 billion TT dollars between 2013 and 2017. In other words, the company was generating surpluses on its operations. The refinery was profitable in just operating terms. And then he said that the board's agreed plan of action would see the company generate $1.2 billion US now in free cash flows between 2018 and 2022. So they had a plan for the company to become even more profitable and therefore to be in a position to pay its taxes and everything else.
I need to ask,
right?
as we're coming,
Yes.
as time is running down, with
Yeah,
regards to
sure.
the
Sorry.
loans,
Yeah.
just to clarify for me, because I've heard different things, right? I didn't necessarily follow it in the moment when it happened. The source of this debt that Petrotrin had to pay off, what was the source? Some of my callers are saying it's that glass to liquids plant, which never was a project that seemingly was a money pit, you know, never really worked. The latest iteration, Nikwan, that's a whole another kettle of fish that even the government seemingly has abandoned. Was that the source of the debt, or was there other sources for the debt?
Principally, okay, so there were two major loans. There was a $750 million US loan, which Petrotrin was paying a very high rate of interest on and was paying all of its principal and interest. So that was principal and interest payments we made. And then there was a $850 million US bond, another loan, which was a bullet payment. So it was paying the interest on that and so on, right? The reality is that those two major loans were obtained to do several things. One was the gas to liquids, which was a total disaster and would have been an absolute loss for Petrotrin. A second one was for the ultra low sulfur diesel plant, so that the refinery would have produced a very high quality diesel that would have met all the environmental standards of low sulfur and so on. That plant never started because there were problems with respect to the integrity of its construction. People said it wasn't able to withstand an earthquake and so on. But there were other refinery upgrades. So there was a refinery optimization plan, which also saw upgrades, which meant that the slate of products became more highly valued, so that more gasoline and aviation fuel and those kinds of products would have come out of the refinery and less fuel oil, which is the lower valued product. Yes, so the refinery actually did become more profitable as a result of that expenditure, but there were also major problems in that the refinery never benefited from the full extent of those loans. The gas to liquids was one major one, and the ultra low sulfur diesel plant was another one. Now, we had argued that those two loans should have been restructured, because those loans never disappeared after the closure of Petrotrin. They're still there, and they're being paid now by Heritage. And we had argued that those loans should have been refinanced at a lower interest rate, because when they were borrowed, it was prior to the 2008 financial collapse and so on, when interest rates were high. After the financial collapse in 2008, interest rates went down to almost to zero. And therefore, if those loans had been refinanced at a lower interest rate, the cash flow of Petrotrin would have been much better.
Well,
yes? I just want to make...
Okay.
Yeah.
No, well, I just wanted to
I just want to say... Yeah. Sorry, Sean, go ahead.
The debt on the refinery, because part of the thing when Patriotic made its bid, and one of the things that I didn't necessarily understand why there was hope to get someone to buy the refinery. It seemed as though there was this large amount of debt that the government wanted the buyer to have to pay off. I didn't necessarily know how fair that was, because you also had to restart the refinery and all of the costs associated with that. Plus, it's saddled with this debt. How are you going to get someone to agree to this? It seems as though they've moved on from that position. But was that the case, at least in the beginning? Was the government trying to use the refinery sale to not just earn money from the refinery? They wanted money for the refinery purchase, but also money to pay off some, if not all, of this debt. Was it the same debt?
Okay, so what the initial thing would have been, that if Patriotic had bought the refinery, the money that they would have paid for the acquisition of the refinery, Petrotrin could have then taken that money to pay down its debt. We don't know what the sale price of the refinery would have been. It may not have been as much as the total debt, but the debt could have been paid down. The new company would not have taken over the liabilities of Petrotrin. They would not have taken over Petrotrin's debt, but the debt burden could have been reduced significantly. Because Heritage was a separate operating company from the refinery after the closure, it would have meant that Heritage would then continue to pay the debt. Now, the problem though was that that debt was secured or those debts were secured by the bondholders with the assets of the refinery and of Paria, which is the port operations, the tank farm and the jetty and pipelines and so on. And therefore, it could not be sold. The refinery could not be sold because somebody had a mortgage on the assets.
Okay.
It's like if you have a motor car, you can't sell it if the bank has the ownership of the car. Yes, because you borrowed money from the bank. So that is what happened. Now with a lease, that is different. And so we don't know what the arrangement is going to be. I know time is running out, but let me just say that between 2004 rather and 2016, Petrotrin contributed in taxes, direct taxes, to the government a total of 49 billion TT dollars, and was, if not the second highest, then the third highest taxpayer contributing to this country. So that this country benefited humongously from the taxes paid directly by Petrotrin. This is not included income taxes paid by workers and taxes paid by companies that would have been hired by Petrotrin to do services and so on.
And then the obvious thing is Petrotrin, at least to some degree, not totally, not all of its profit would have been in US, but a good chunk of its revenue and the money that it was moving around and would have been in foreign exchange, not so? And I ask that because given the loans, the potential severance payments when you restructured Petrotrin, and then our foreign exchange situation, wouldn't it make more sense? And I did say this before, but I wasn't confident in the information. So I'm asking you now to give me a much better footing. Wouldn't it make more sense to keep the refinery operating to help service these things, even if the refinery was essentially breaking even? I mean, your argument is they were above the operating line to make, a surplus. If you want to put somebody that in, okay, they're making a loss based on accounting, but it's not loans on the refinery. It's loans Petrotrin took out and used the refinery as collateral. So wouldn't it make more sense to keep the refinery running, to keep that revenue coming in to help service these things? Because part of the balance of trade situation, I think, the refinery could have helped. Even if the refinery was breaking even, it would have been a much better foreign exchange situation than without the refinery. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yes, I do, totally. And in fact, Paria, which is importing fuel for sale locally, of course, when you sell the fuel locally, you're getting TT dollars, right? But it has to pay the trader or the refiner from where they're buying the fuel in US dollars. So like, for example, with bitumen, Paria is buying that from Petrojam out of Jamaica. They have to pay in US dollars. So Paria now has to get US dollars from the central bank. So one of the problems of our foreign exchange crisis is the fact that the energy sector, which is supposed to be a net earner of foreign exchange, is actually now not able to earn foreign exchange because they have to get foreign exchange from the central bank. Heritage, on the other hand, which is selling crude oil, would earn foreign exchange, but a lot of that is going to pay the debt. So there is not necessarily a lot of net foreign exchange coming into the country from Heritage. So you're right, there is a problem of the closure of the refinery and how the thing was restructured to impact negatively on our forex situation. You're absolutely right about that. And there are other costs. Yes, the cost of sending home. I asked Wilfred Espide that publicly in one of the forums. If you said, let us assume, but we don't admit that the refinery was losing money, you want to close the refinery, why then are you sending home all of the Petrotrin workers, including all the workers in exploration and production? They're not part of the refinery problem. And he said, well, it's to get rid. I asked him to get rid of the collective agreements. He said yes. And I said, therefore, you want to get rid of the union. Because to get rid of the collective agreements, you have to get rid of the union. So it was union busting. I was to drive down the price of labor because the workers who are now doing the work that would have been done under Petrotrin are being hired under contract situations and being paid maybe a third or a quarter of what they would have worked for at Petrotrin being operating.
That situation there, I want to ask a follow-up because one of the things that came out of the Paria tragedy, some people have pointed to the fact that, look, a lot of people with experience essentially were let go. They were replaced with people with less experience. Arguably, institutional knowledge was lost, and that potentially contributed to some of the, from our point of view, or I'll speak for myself, my point of view, and I guess to some extent the Commission of Inquiry's chair point of view, poor decision making in that crisis, as well as it's up for OSHA, both PARIA and LMCS, how that entire work order was structured and everything like that. Do we have to consider the fact that, look, we lost institutional knowledge in our state-owned energy sector entities, and to some extent we need to worry about things like PARIA happening again, among other things, among other consequences of that deficiency. Is that fair?
Very, very fair, because in that Commission of Inquiry, several things came out. That there was one person who was a Kenson employee who was also involved in the decision making. Now, Kenson is a company that hires people on labor supply contracts. So you get hired by Kenson, excuse me, and then you are sent to to PARIA or to Heritage or whatever to work, and so you did not have proper supervision of the project. You did not have the union, which acts as a check and balance to make sure that the safety rules and so on are being upheld and maintained. And if they're not, the union would have shut down the job. Of course, people would say that you're losing money as a result of that. But that is what the union is there for, to make sure that the job is being done in a safe way and that workers' lives and limbs are not at risk. So you lost the union as a check and balance. You have labor supply arrangements. So you have Kenson, then you had LMCS, then you had PARIA, and there was no clear, there was no clarity about authority and decision making, and there was a loss of institutional knowledge, and all of that took place. And regrettably, 4 men lost their lives as a result of that. So you're absolutely right.
So with one of the things that I think the government is kind of, at best, it's an uphill sail or uphill struggle to try to sell us the concept of these Petrojam deals. Because essentially people are saying, but we had a refinery. You want to restart the refinery. The implications are the refinery should be able to operate without losing us money in and of itself. And now we have to have further import deals with a fellow Caribbean nation who also, because the government keeps saying we're not producing the same oil we used to. They don't have oil, but they have a refinery, and we're buying from their refinery. It's not no insult to Jamaica. It's just, it's kind of ridiculous that we were sitting on an asset because we chose to shut it down, and we're looking to somebody else who's now new to the game, to some, at least newer than us, I would imagine, to provide things for us. To some extent, I don't know, am I right to say I don't necessarily care how good the Petrojam deal may or may not be. This whole situation, it just highlights the failures that may have gone on with managing the refinery?
Yeah, I mean, the Petrojam refinery is a much smaller refinery than Point-à-Pierre. So 38,000 barrels, I think, per day refinery. Point-à-Pierre, when it was closed down, was rated at about 165,000 barrels, what would have been operating at about 135 to 140,000 barrels a day. The Point-à-Pierre refinery was a much more efficient refinery in that the product slate was much better than the Petrojam refinery, in that we produce aviation fuel, gasoline, middle distillates in much more relative quantities than, so, we were like 35% fuel oil, whereas Petrojam was about 50% fuel oil, and therefore our refinery was more efficient because we produce more higher value products. So all of those points are valid, and therefore, I mean, buying bunker fuel from Petrojam, if PARIA wants to engage in the trade, in doing bunkering, which essentially is providing fuel oil for ships that come into Trinidad and Tobago, that's what bunkering is, then it has to get the bunker fuel, which is diesel, heavy diesel fuel oil, from somewhere. If it doesn't buy it from Petrojam, it'll have to buy it from an oil trader, international oil trader, or it'll have to buy it from some other refinery. So they figured, well, it's better we buy it from Jamaica than a U.S. company or some international trader. So that is fair enough. But on the other hand, if we had the refinery up and running, we would have been able to do bunkering utilizing our own output of the Point-of-Care refinery, which would then have made it even more profitable, because to bring bunker fuel out of Jamaica or wherever into Trinidad, there's a shipping cost and so on, then you have to pay Petrojam a profit. Whereas if we had our own refinery, there'd be no shipping costs, right? It's just pumped into a tank, into, which from the tank to the ship in the pipelines and so on. And therefore, it would be far more profitable to do bunkering with our own refinery.
Well, I want to close off as we're coming to the end of the interview. And I want to put you on the spot a little bit here and just ask for your opinion. Why was the decision to close down the refinery made? Because it doesn't seem as though it was an effective business decision given the overall state of Petrotrin. I mean, you may have alluded to your opinion already when you said, well, no, certain workers were sent home. That whole exercise was done essentially as an exercise in union busting. But the problem is now, I mean, we're looking at the business side of it. The nation, I guess, rightfully has questions the longer this whole situation goes on. So why do you think they decided to do this? Because it doesn't seem to me that there was any obvious upside outside of the union busting. And I don't know if, even if I'm motivated by politics, if I was in their position, that would be enough for me. Do you think, based on what you know, that was enough for them, or was there more? Or was there something else?
Well, there was never a single study that recommended the closure of the refinery. And there was never a study that recommended that all the workers should be sent home and the company be restructured into separate companies in the way they have done it. Not a single study. There were 3 PowerPoint slides, that is all. 3 PowerPoint slides. And when Espinay was asked in the industrial court by the union's attorney, Douglas Mendes, senior counsel, who made the decision to close down the company, send home all the workers, shut down the refinery, Mr. Espinay's only answer was the numbers. The numbers made the decision. Now, I don't know that numbers make any decision, right? People make decisions. And he could not say, or he refused to say, let me put it that way, as to who made that decision. My view is it was the Cabinet Energy Subcommittee that made that decision, and on the basis of 3 PowerPoint slides. And they argued that we were going to be downgraded by S&P and the country would have gone into crisis and all kinds of stuff. Remember that argument? I went in the industrial court and gave evidence and showed that not a single report by S&P or Moody's or by Fitch, the 3 rating agencies that the country was using, ever suggested that Petrotrin or the country would have been downgraded as a result of what was happening at Petrotrin. Not a single one. Right, and I provided documentary evidence of that as well. And neither Reginald Amor, who represented the company, nor Siram Jairam, who represented the Attorney General in cross-examining me, could shake my evidence. So that was another lie that the government told. And therefore, some people argue it was to try to cover up A&V, drilling and that whole thing of fake oil. I don't think that that was the real reason. I personally still believe that it was to get at the union and to weaken the union in order to enable a restructuring of the society where there is less defense for ordinary working people and therefore better wealth and profits for the elite few.
I mean, I will admit I am one commentator who is hard on unions, but at the same time I understand their necessity. And also, just like there are other situations where just because I disagree with somebody or something doesn't mean it's automatically everything. And in this case, my issues with the OWTU and what it may or may not say, what it may or may not do is kind of besides the point. You made a good case that regardless of the union, the refinery itself was what it was. And if that's the case, I think that's a shame, because even if the union was the most uncooperative stakeholder or partner in existence, that I don't think it would justify the decision from my point of view to kind of end it like this And now
Sure.
we're left in this position where we're trying to, I guess they're trying to reverse the decision, but they don't want to say that they're trying to reverse the decision. That's what it looks like to me. Is there any hope? I guess this should be my last question. Is there any hope that the refinery can come on stream now? It's been, you know, in mothballs. And then we also have, we didn't even consider or mention the cost to keep it kind of like in this semi-state, maintained state, but not operating. Is there any hope that it can come on stream? Because one of the fears for people like me is that the cost just to restart it might be so high, it's no longer economically viable, or it's going to reach the point eventually, if we take too long, that it wouldn't be economically viable, being it's an old asset and it's just sitting down there.
Yeah, it can be restarted. The longer it takes to restart, the higher the cost of restarting. You're absolutely right, because all of the equipment, all of the plants and pumps and compressors pipes, tanks have to be examined, carefully inspected to make sure that the integrity of those things are able to withstand temperatures, high temperatures and pressures and so on. A lot of things will have to be changed out. So a lot of money will have to be spent in getting the refinery into a condition where it could be safely restarted. We're talking upwards of $500 million US. That's my back of the envelope. I'm not an expert in that, but I would think it's probably upwards of $500 million US. What that would do, however, would be to inject a huge amount of stimulus in the domestic economy. So workers will have to be employed to do that work. Companies, local companies, can do the work of inspection, of pipe fitting, of repairing or building new tanks, and repairing compressors and pumps, instrumentation. Local companies could get that work, and therefore there'd be a huge injection of stimulus, which this economy badly needs. There'll be foreign exchange coming in, and jobs will be created, and the multiplier effect economically would be extremely important, not just to South Trinidad, but to the country as a whole. So I think that it is necessary to do it. The operator who comes in would obviously have to factor in the initial capital investment of the work to get the refinery restarted in its medium to long-term cash flow. But given the fact the refinery was generating a positive margin, both gross and a net margin, it should be able to service a debt of like $400-500 million US amortized at a relatively low interest rate over 10-15 years. So that should be manageable in my view. You know, just one last point, Sean,
Sure.
and that is that in the beginning of August, this came out in the Industrial Court, the beginning of August 2018, the company had hired an expat, I think he was an American, to be the vice president for refining and marketing. So he had been hired early August, contract signed and so on. They were working out where he was going to live and all of that. And then 2.5-3 weeks later, they announced they're going to close down. Something happened in that 2-3 week period, and the country needs to know exactly what happened in those 2-3 weeks. Because you can't hire, and they just hired a vice president for exploration and production. So the board, up until early to mid-August, was in the process of restructuring. There was an agreement with the union to engage in discussions about restructuring, which would have seen workers perhaps going home under voluntary separation, which would be much cheaper than having to sever everybody.
Right.
And also have a liability now to the pension plan, because the pension plan is in deficit, in that because there's no money coming in, but people are retiring and will continue to retire until the last person gets a pension. You need to now the government is now going to have to fund that liability. So the cost of what they did was much greater than simply downsizing the labor force by an early retirement program, by sweetening a package for the guys over 50 who would have had got a full pension. They would have been able to pay off their mortgage. Their children would have been out of school, out of university, and they would have worked 30 odd years in the industry. They would be quite prepared to move on in life and do something else. And that would have been a much more viable way of dealing with the problem. And we would have still had the refinery as an asset, restructure those loans at a lower interest rate, which eventually had to be done and so on. And we would have energy security. and we would not be having this conversation like we are doing this morning.
I mean, I want to thank you for joining me to have the conversation. I agree with your analysis on that last point. I think it's similar to the commissioner situation. They were looking to try to make legislation to allow Guy Griffith to act and presumably then, you know, get him a new contract. And then all of a sudden, you know, they go through all of these motions to keep him, and then all of a sudden, something happened of which we don't fully know exactly why and if any laws or processes were breached and all of that. And it implies politics. We just, okay, but what was it? You're right, there's things like that we do really need to know, but I would argue the refinery is a much bigger situation because of the implications now that have trickled down throughout the last 6 to 7 years now with 2025. So thank you for the discussion. I have to say you have helped solidify my change in opinion on this matter. So kudos to you and everyone else that have been able to provide much better information, because Minister Young is trying to justify certain things, and I'm like, you're not really giving us enough to justify these things, and people want to hear more. But thank you, Mr. Ndula, for at the very least giving us your perspective and giving us more.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on for so long. Appreciate it.
Of course, sir. Folks, we'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll open the phone lines for what time we have left, and you can call in and give your comments. But Talking Point will continue after this. Stay tuned.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private health care affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Welcome back to Talking Points, and of course now is the time we open the phone line. Just want to say up front, if you call in, please don't try to follow the conversation on your TV while talking to us on the phone. There's a delay. With that said, if we get any calls, I just like to highlight a couple of things. I was speaking to Mr. Abdullah, and I encouraged him to try and hit all the media rounds. I think things like this, not just the story, but things like this, we really need to not let it die. And unfortunately, part of the human condition is, you know, getting something exposed to the public once is probably not enough. And conversations on the economy with regards to topics like this it needs to continue and further develop, and part of that is, and hopefully he will have the ability to do it, be afforded the opportunity to do it, is to hit all the media rounds. And look, if people disagree with Mr. Abdullah, that's fine, but it should not be the case where we disagree with him, so what he has to say should not be heard, but rather, let's have a debate on the issues and see, you know, who comes out on top. The truth usually is, the facts are not always lies on either side, although in this case there are some things where it seems to be contradicting his version of events, the government version of events. We've seen the results, so it's hard for me to take the government's version of events seriously. But, you know, usually people might have different perspective on how they interpret the facts. All of that is valuable, and I would encourage people to continue to engage in that way. There's something about the current international, global political environment where debate is a four-letter word. It's something that people don't want to engage in. People are too married to their opinion and their side and what they perceive to be as right. And it's very hard for us to progress if we are resistant to actually having a discussion. With that said, I'm holding up our caller from Mova. Good morning, caller. You're on the air. Sorry for the wait.
Good morning. This caller from Mova. The Securities and Exchange Commission, they released a report concerning Guando, right? And they said that they have a lot of issues. The company has a lot of issues in terms of marketing and financing, plus false statement, different stuff now, right? Which is too much to go into. But when they compare that and they look at Patriotic, that the Energy Minister Stuart Young talk about fake documents, and Patriotic said they could defend that, they could show where they were innocent in court, right? And the reality is that the government wants us to absorb all these faults that Quando has, right? And apart from that, Quando say that they're so impressed with the kind of technical support that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, with the people, all what they need here in Trinidad to operationalize the refinery. So why it is that the government trying to push this on the people, trying to push foreign interests to own our refinery, when we have the people here who could operationalize our refinery, including Patriotic, and bringing income and such for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. Well, and this is the thing, right? We're not saying what the government's motivations are or not in any absolute or definite terms, but their course of actions help the theory or support the theory that a lot of what they did was political. Therefore, with regards to Patriotic, could it be that they don't necessarily want Patriotic, because then that might cause the OWTU to come back, which, to be fair to the government, I don't necessarily think the OWTU is a union that really knows how to compromise itself and do anything beyond look for the financial compensation of its members. It's not one of the unions that I agree with very often, but to some extent the refinery, I would argue, is a bigger issue than how unions operate in the country, and the OWTU in particular, right? Regardless of if we like them or not. This situation in the refinery, I think, is very unfortunate, and there's a lot to regret, I think, when you look at the outcome. Now, maybe we'll get a central or agreeing opinion from the next caller, Mr. San Fernando. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Okay, so you've gotten the union's perspective, or Mr. Abdullah's perspective,
yes,
which is a lot clearer than the other gentleman you had from the OWTU. You remember what's his name? You had him on some months ago.
Well, I think that was for the pension, though, if my memory serves correct. We didn't necessarily go on
but
the
general thing, but he spoke about that.
Yes.
He spoke about the refinery. Now, I don't agree with some of the things Mr. Abdullah said with respect to how he put forward the numbers.
Right.
Right? And because a loss is a loss.
Yeah.
But generally, a lot of what he said is accurate. I attended some of those meetings as well, that he talked about, those public forums that he talked about, and they were too short for everybody to offer their perspective. However, one of the things that he didn't speak about, or I don't think you totally bombarded the information, you forgot to ask it.
Mm-hmm.
With this new okay, they talk about is Oando is the preferred bidder right now, so they go to enter into negotiations with them. There is no mention of what bothers me, let me put it this way, what bothers me in this whole situation is the refinery still being held as security for the loan?
Okay, yeah. I think based on what Mr. Abdullah said, I believe it's implied, my interpretation based on what he said is that yes, it is. Because he said that the arrangement does not allow for the sale, but it does allow for a lease. And Awando would be leasing the refinery.
Well, leasing the refinery, well, I'm yet to officially hear that.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
So that is, for me, that is the most important thing in this whole thing. What happens to the refinery in this deal as an asset?
Mr. San Fernando, I do need to ask though, based on what Mr. Abdullah said, I know you said a loss is a loss, but the cost that would have taken the operating surplus into the negative from the loan payments, those loan payments would have still existed even if the refinery shut down. So I guess that's why I asked one of the questions at the end that I did. The refinery not operating at a loss, right, but still accounts for a loss because of the loan payments that weren't necessarily from the refinery. Since it's operating, at a profit or even break even and still aiding us foreign exchange, to some extent, it's still facilitating things and not adding to the burden. The loan still exists and still have to be paid back. We didn't drop the loans by shutting down the refinery magically.
No, we didn't.
So
however,
okay.
Go with your question.
No, I just to clarify, like, do you disagree that the refinery should not have been shut down? Because I'm starting more and more to think, listen, regardless of the negatives, the positives outweigh the negatives and would have helped contribute to our pre-existing situation, or our current existing situation, sorry.
We've had three major state enterprises that went through this similar situation. One was Carney 1975 Limited, which we shut down.
Yeah.
It closed. The other one was Tobago International Airways. That was the official name of BWI.
Right. Okay.
And that was closed and reopened as Caribbean Airlines.
Yes.
And then this one Petrotrin. Now, there are two things we conflate in, Sean. What happened is we focused on the refinery. However, Petrotrin was closed.
Right.
The entire company was closed, and then so they shut down the entire company. The refinery was the major issue within the company, within the Petrotrin company. The refinery that is accounting semantics. When Mr. Dula spoke about the net foreign exchange effect of the refinery. Now let me say this: the refinery were earning foreign exchange, and they had to spend foreign exchange. So the foreign exchange that you earn from selling the refined products from the bunkering operation, you also now have to import food from that money. You also had to do maintenance. A lot of the things that you had to import, you had to use foreign exchange to buy parts, to buy chemicals, to buy a lot of stuff. And we don't have those intricate numbers.
Right.
If it is, those things would come from our serious forensic audit, which we don't have to see. So it's up in the air. It's up in the air, and I won't fault Mr. Abdullah for putting it in his way. But at the end of the day, I agreed with shutting. I was one of those persons that agreed with shutting down the refinery.
Well,
however, yes, I did agree with shutting it down.
No, but like, did you agree to shut it down for this long, to this extent?
I had based on what I had known, and I thought it would have been shut down, which I agreed with, and reopened as another entity, as a smaller entity,
like Heritage and
Caribbean Airlines, like Caribbean Airlines,
right?
So you come back with a separate Heritage, a separate Paria, and a smaller refinery.
Yes,
a smaller refinery.
Yes,
Because remember, Sean, that refinery is an old entity that when other people forgot in 1985 when Texaco left this country and but they sold that refinery to the state and pulled out. That decision was made 10 years prior. So it was not maintained. So it took over 20 years to get it to where it was because of there was deliberate negligence in maintenance by that international company. So I agree with open it up at a smaller entity. Probably not as small as Petrojam, but something a little bigger, probably doing 60,000 barrels or something like that. That you could still get a revenue and supply the local market. But there were a lot of other things hidden inside there that I could tell you about if you had a longer program that was seriously affecting that company in terms of operations.
I think Mr. Abdullah didn't necessarily outright say it, but again, the implications of what he said, he did not say anything to contradict what you're saying with regards to, he did say outright how it was being governed. Now, maybe, not necessarily the same details, he's not implying the same details you're implying, I understand that. But I actually do think that the net result of my conversations with you and him actually leads me to more or less the same conclusion. Because I guess when I say shut down, it also includes shut down and still not operated in 2025. When you say shut down, it was essentially restructuring, right? And restarting immediately under the state, under a different structure. And I agree with that. Or rather, I agreed with it at the time, like you, and I don't have any reason to disagree or say that your opinion is wrong. And to some extent, Mr. Abdullah himself, what he said is in line with that, at least to some degree. So,
and let me say this quickly. When the Rowley administration came in 2015, remember those loans and stuff took place before those were under Mr. Manning's tenure, right?
Yeah.
And when the People's Partnership, US/UNC government came in 2010, that 5 years that they were there, they didn't necessarily want to make a decision, and we had our revenues were good enough to carry this refinery, this entity, this Petrochin entity for a while.
Yeah.
But when the Rowley administration came in, whatever they say, and mismanagement of the UN, the People Partnership, whatever it is, but when they came in, this was staring them straight in the face. This issue was staring them straight in the face. And I go back to the professor. This was a result of those. A big part of it is the loans that Mr. Mike Malcolm took under his tenure, and those failed plans that we talk about. David talk about it too.
Yes.
The GTL, the gas liquids, the gasoline optimization issue, and those refinery upgrades that Mr. Manning put his foot in purposely. It upsets me that was given to somebody, one of those upgrades, who they was not capable, but had a relationship. And that is where the politics interferes with the business of the country.
Caller, to go to your other example of Carl, the Heathrow slips.
Sean, why are you trying to upset me this morning?
An even more egregious example, the sale of the Heathrow slips, and that was under Mr. Manning, and it's probably a similar thing to what you...
MPs who did that.
Yeah. I just want to, dare I ask your opinion, as I know you're not an interview guest, but is it that the PNM government just didn't know what to do? Or do you think that it was union busting? With regards to the situation you said was staring them in the face. It wasn't an easy situation, I get that, but was it that they just didn't know what to do?
I think at the time, because of the financial situation that the government saw that was staring them in the face, I think they thought they would have killed two birds with one stone.
Ah. They outsmarted themselves.
I thought they felt they would have killed two birds with one stone because the union was that single decision has weakened the most powerful union in the country. Weakened them.
But at what cost?
At what cost?
To the country. All right.
Because it is what it is now. So I just hope, because everybody, we're going to have a story with everybody, or Wango, whoever, even if Dangote, you would have an issue with him too.
Yeah.
Because everybody has issues, especially in the petroleum business. Companies look at profit. What an oil company main objective is to increase shareholder value, which is profit for the shareholders, and that's not a moral issue.
Right.
So
at that level, yes.
So we have, if it is that we have a preferred bidder now, let's try and work with it. Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. And with that said, I'll just go back to the first caller. Somebody pointed out, given the state of our situation, or given our situation, let me not use unnecessary words, most likely anybody that approaches us outside of patriotic, so anybody international that approaches us, will have skeletons in their closet. We're not going to get some squeaky clean, like real, this is like the best thing ever. No, we're going to get somebody that has a little bit of skeletons, because our situation is not no surefire bet with regards to our refinery. That's what it looked like. We haven't even signed a lease agreement. They are the preferred bidder. They still have to come in here and see if this is ultimately feasible or not. So with that said, I mean, was Patriotic a good bidder or not? I'm not too sure. We never really got full details. We don't know what the criteria is. Giving out numbers is not something that politicians that are in active government tend to do. Transparency is something that a lot of politicians and public figures don't understand. It can work for you. And now we're in this position where the low-hanging fruit, whether right or wrong, to make these assumptions is that the government not looking so hot because the refinery has been shut down for so long and we importing from all these other people who arguably we should not be in this position, but we are. To what benefit? Who benefits? Who benefited from Petroshan being shut down? Was it the case that they just didn't have a better plan? And this is why the opposition, it would be best for them to give us good proposals so that when they're on the campaign trail, they could point to that and say, we could do better and here's how. And until we get that, I feel as though they themselves would be in a similarly weak position as the government currently. We could wish and hope for a lot of things. We could say, water for all and free education for all, but look how those things have not necessarily turned out the way we would have expected if we just ran with the hype and the emotions of the statements, as opposed to ask the nitty-gritties about the implementation and the details to do it properly. Thanks to the callers. Thanks to my guest, Mr. Abdullah, for joining me on the in-depth conversation. This is one of those, this might be one of the biggest, or the biggest thing, the single biggest thing that actually might define the Keith Rowley administration. The implications might be bigger even than COVID. But we have to wait and see how the dust settles and if we might find more information in the future. Until then, you can make today as we wait for more information in the future. Make today a good day. And remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Stay safe out there. We will see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private health care affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
SM Group International Limited,